Hello and welcome to our reading of Howard Zinn. So we're going to take a break from the timeline for a little bit and read some chapters out of the Howard Zinn book. You've already been exposed to this a little bit. Howard Zinn was a historian who specifically set out to try and tell the stories that otherwise the people whose stories wouldn't have been told otherwise. So we're going to jump in on chapter 17. This is all scanned into Google Classroom, so you can follow along in Google Classroom. The video will stop you and ask you some questions along the way. Chapter 17 is called Black Revolt and Civil Rights. The Black Revolt of the 1950s and 1960s surprised white America, but it shouldn't have. When people are oppressed, memory is the one thing that cannot be taken from them. For people with memories of oppression, revolt is always just an inch below the surface. Blacks in the United States had the memory of slavery. Beyond that, they lived with the daily realities of lynchings, insults, and segregation. As the 20th century went on, they found new ways to resist. So we're talking about this time period that we consider to be the civil rights movement in the United States between 1950 and 1980 on your timeline. The word segregation we did before, it means to keep separate by race. When we talk about a lot of the Jim Crow laws that said that there was one water fountain for white people and one water fountain for black people, one school for white kids, one school for black kids, even libraries that black kids weren't allowed to use the white kids' library, things like that. That's an example of segregation. Fighting back. In the 1920s, a black poet named Claude McKay wrote these lines: "If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot. Like men, we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back." McKay's words were entered into the Congressional Record as an example of the dangerous new ideas of young black men. It must have seemed dangerous to the nation's leaders that blacks spoke of fighting back. Some blacks fought the system by joining the Communist Party. The Communists had been active in the South. They had helped defend the Scottsboro Boys, 9 young black men falsely accused of rape in Alabama. Among them, well-known African Americans connected to the Communist Party were the scholar W.E.B. Du Bois and actor and singer Paul Robeson. During the 1930s, the Communists organized committees to seek help for the needy. An organizer named Angelo Herndon was arrested and charged with promoting revolution. He recalled his trial. "They questioned me in great detail. Did I believe that the bosses and government ought to pay insurance to unemployed workers? That Negroes should have complete equality with white people? Did I feel that the working class could run the mills and the mines and the government? That it wasn't necessary to have bosses at all? I told them I believed all that, and more." Herndon spent 5 years in prison before the Supreme Court ruled that the law he had been arrested for breaking was unconstitutional. To the establishment, men like Herndon were signs of a frightening new mood among blacks. That mood was militancy, a willingness to fight. Towards civil rights. President Harry Truman knew that the United States had to do something about race for 2 reasons. One reason was to calm the frustrated black people of the United States. The other reason had to do with America's image in the world. Non-white people around the world were accusing the United States of being a racist society. America's Cold War with the Soviet Union was on, and each side wanted to gain influence around the globe. But the poor civil rights record of the United States could hold it back in world politics. Truman created a committee on civil rights in 1946. The committee recommended laws against lynching and against racial discrimination in jobs and voting. Congress took no action. However, Truman did order the armed forces to desegregate, or end racial segregation. It took 10 years, but the military was finally integrated, with blacks and whites no longer separated. The nation's public schools remained segregated until courageous Southern blacks took on the Supreme Court in a series of lawsuits. In 1954, in a decision called Brown versus the Board of Education, very famous Supreme Court case, the court ordered the nation's public schools to stop the separate but equal treatment of children separated by race. So there was this phrase that was thrown around, separate but equal. It should be fine to have one water fountain for black people and one water fountain for white people as long as they were equal water fountains, who cared? Except that they were never equal. And that's really the catch to all of this. That, yeah, there was one school for black kids and the teachers didn't have to be certified and qualified like the white kids' teachers did. The white schools had textbooks, and the black schools got all the textbooks that the white schools threw out. I mean, clearly this was not a separate but equal situation. So, in Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court ordered the nation's public schools to stop separate but equal treatment of children separated by race. The court's big decision sent a message around the world. The United States government had outlawed segregation. But change came slowly. 10 years later, more than 3/4 of the school districts in the South were still segregated. Then you have a little inset page about Claudette Colvin. Around 4 o'clock p.m. on March 2nd, 1955, 9 months before 42-year-old Rosa Parks did it, 15-year-old Claudette Colvin asserted her constitutional right to her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama, helping to jumpstart the civil rights movement. Confronting jeers, shoves, and insults from the white people around her and the 2 policemen who arrested her, she was charged with violating the segregation law, disorderly conduct, and assaulting the arresting officers. Here she tells the story in her own words. On March 2nd, 1955, I got on the bus in front of Dexter Avenue Church. I went to the middle. No white people were on the bus at that time. It was mostly school children. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. I think I'd just finished eating a candy bar. Then the bus began to fill up. White people got on and began to stare at me. The bus motorman asked me to get up. We were getting into the square where all the buses take their routes in either direction. A colored lady got on and she was pregnant. I was sitting next to the window. The seat next to me was the only seat unoccupied. She didn't realize what was going on. She didn't know that the bus driver had asked me to get up. She just saw the empty seat and sat next to me. A white lady was sitting across the aisle from me, and it was against the law for you to sit in the same aisle with a white person. The bus driver looked back through the rearview mirror and again told me to get up. I didn't. I knew he was talking to me. He said, "Hey, get up." I didn't say anything. When I didn't get up, he didn't move the bus. He said before he'd drive on, I'd have to get up. People were saying, "Why don't you get up? Why don't you get up?" One girl said, "She knows she has to get up." Then another girl said, "She doesn't have to. Only one thing you have to do is stay black and die." The white people were complaining. The driver stopped the bus and said, "This can't go on." Then he got up and said, "I'm going to call the cops." First, a traffic patrolman came on the bus and he asked, "Are any of you gentlemen enough to get up and give this pregnant lady your seat?" There were 2 black men in the back of the bus who were sanitation workers. They got up and the pregnant lady went and sat in the back. That left me, still sitting by the window. I remained there and the traffic patrolman said, "Aren't you going to get up?" I said, "No, I do not have to get up. I paid my fare, so I do not have to get up. It's my constitutional right to sit here just as much as that lady. It's my constitutional right." For blacks, progress wasn't fast enough. In the early 1960s, black people rose in rebellion all over the South. By the late 1960s, there were wild uprisings in 100 northern cities too. What triggered this angry revolt? A 43-year-old black woman named Rosa Parks sat down one day in the white section of a city bus. She had long been active in the NAACP, which was determined to challenge segregated seating on Montgomery buses. She was arrested. Montgomery's blacks called a mass meeting. They boycotted the city buses, refusing to ride. Instead, they walked or organized carpools. The city was losing a lot of income from bus fares. It arrested 100 of the boycott leaders. White segregationists turned to violence. They exploded bombs in 4 black churches. They fired a shotgun through the front door of the home of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a minister who helped lead the boycott. But the black people in Montgomery kept up the boycott, and in November of 1956, the Supreme Court made segregation on local bus lines illegal. And that's where we'll stop today. We'll pick up on the next page in our next segment. Thanks!